Welcome everybody to tonight's webinar and a welcome to those of you who might be watching the recording at a later time. My name is Nicole Rollbusch. I'm a Practice Development Officer at Emerging Minds and I'll be facilitating tonight's webinar. Next slide please. I'd like to acknowledge all of the lands that we are coming from today and pay my respects to the elders past, present and those who are emerging, and acknowledge the deep connection that Aboriginal people have with lands and the waterways and kin and community, and the importance of these things to all Aboriginal children and families. And I'm on Kaurna land tonight here in Adelaide, but extend that acknowledgement to all of the different lands that all of our participants are coming from, as well as our panellists. And if you'd like to pop in the chat where what land you're on today, that would be great. Next slide, please. So we've got one more upcoming webinar in this series. So this is the fifth webinar in the fifth series, which is a collaboration between Emerging Minds and MHPN. So the registrations are open now for decolonising mental health when working with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children and families, which is coming up on June the 6th. So if you'd like an invitation to that one, to keep up to date with that one, please subscribe to the Emerging Minds newsletter, and the link is on your screen at the moment, or sign up to the MHPN portal. Next slide, please. Thank you. Just a little bit on the tech side of things for tonight. So you'll see three dots in the lower right corner of your screen, and that's for you to access information. And under there, you'll find the slides for tonight, a list of resources as well that we've put together, a link to the survey that we're hoping you'll complete your feedback on tonight, and some technical support as well. So we've got our learning outcomes here. I won't go into them in massive detail because you would have seen those when you registered. But generally, our aim for tonight is to hopefully increase your skills and confidence in responding to children who've experienced bullying behaviour and supporting their mental health. Beautiful. So next slide, please. So it's now my pleasure to introduce our panel for tonight. So the three people here and myself will be with you for the next hour or so. And if you'd like any more information on any of our panellists, everybody's bios were disseminated with the webinar invitation, so please feel free to jump back in and read about everybody if you wish. But I'll just introduce each of them in turn now. So Jess is our child and family partner. And Jess, you're a foster parent and a youth worker. How do those two roles complement each other and help you in supporting children?
Hi. For me, I was a youth worker for a long time before I became a parent, and my age group is older children and teenagers, so they really go perfectly hand in hand. I definitely use a lot of my skills as a youth worker at home, and the experiences I have at home bring a deeper understanding in my role as a youth worker to understand what children, young people and families really go through on a day-to-day kind of basis.
Yeah, great. Lots of transferable skills, I imagine.
Definitely.
Thanks, Jess, and welcome. Hayley, we've got Hayley, our mental health social worker, joining us. And Hayley, you're really passionate about working with young people and families who are particularly facing marginalisation or multiple vulnerabilities. What is it that particularly interests you in that area?
Thanks, Nicole, and welcome everyone. This has been a really long-standing interest of mine, and I'm particularly interested in experiences of injustice in relation to operations of power and operations of gender. And I'm really interested in how to make those things visible and therapeutic responses to those. So I'm interested in, working with people who have experienced trauma, but who also experience disadvantage in the systems that they're in their life, whether that's government, health, school systems, cultural and religious systems. I'm really interested in that intersection. It's been a great place to work.
Great. Thanks, Hayley, and welcome. And Jessica, our clinical psychologist tonight. So you're working in a school now. What are some of the similarities and differences that you've noticed in that setting compared to other settings that you've worked in as a psychologist?
I think schools are the first to see a lot of these students and the first to hear about some of the challenges that are coming up for them. So often I think we're the first to identify challenges before things sort of start to unravel at home. But that said, I think the presentations that we see both in the school setting and then in the public or the private setting are really similar. Anxiety tends to be the most common presentation, and even mental health difficulties in general in children and adolescents have really skyrocketed post-COVID. I guess what we're tending to see is that, the things that usually cause anxiety, including, bullying, social difficulties, family difficulties, that sort of thing still exists. But there's also a lot of other factors at play now, including gender confusion, identity, the financial pressures that are happening everywhere. So I think, the impacts can actually be a lot broader. And I think also in a school setting, just because the wait lists are so long now to access services within private practice, where we're no longer just that sort of short-term intervention, which potentially school psychologists used to be. Instead, we're doing much, much longer term therapy work.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Jessica, and welcome to you as well. I'm sure everyone in the audience will join me in giving you a warm virtual welcome. So from now on, what we're going to do is each of the panellists are going to give a short presentation, and then we'll head into a Q&A session for the remainder of the webinar. So without any further delay, we'll jump into the content and I'll hand over to Jess, our child and family partner. Thanks, Jess.
Hi, my name is Jess. I do a lot with emerging minds around my lived experience, which is definitely part of that was being a carer for my mum, both as a child, a young person, as a young adult, and she has multiple mental illness diagnosis. We also moved around a lot, which I think is quite relevant to tonight's topic, around bullying and the experiences I had with that. Next slide, please. For me, my experience of growing up as a young carer meant I kind of thought my family were normal and assumed everybody else's were the same. Once I sort of started to notice there was a difference, other kids also noticed that as well. For me, it meant because we moved a lot, it really went unnoticed and it felt like, the adults in my life didn't really care. And for me, my strategy was basically just to put up with it as best I could. I kind of got to adulthood and realised that, some of those experiences were quite negative, and I really didn't want to repeat that in my own life, adult life, as a, youth worker, but also as a potential parent in the future. Next slide, please. So my parenting experience is a little bit unique. I come to parenting very deliberately. It was very planned, and the foster care process is very, I would use the word invasive, because you have to really make sure that as a parent, I'm ready to kind of tackle what's going to come into my home. For me, I really wanted to work with the older age group. I felt like that was important. So that means that the young people that I've looked after often do come with both a background of being bullied and also bullying other people as well. For me, the things that kind of I picked up on quite quickly were that, you know, non-attendance previously at school was a reason to be bullied and to be singled out. Their appearance. So often you don't try and make any big changes in a child's life. And so things like what they're wearing and how they look after their personal hygiene and things like that, it's a bit of a slow process. So that was still happening while they lived with me. There were kids that were kind of picking on that. I think also just who their family were. So sometimes, you know, you don't end up in the same area, but sometimes they do. And so kids kind of know there's been this big change in their life and it becomes a, you know, potential bullying sort of, experience because of that. Next slide, please. So what I've noticed, particularly in primary school, the word bullying just gets used so much, and I would say probably overused. Lots of kids kind of learn about this stuff, but often don't always get the kind of depth of what it actually means. And so it becomes really hard to clarify with children what it is, because they learn this stuff at school and they say, oh yeah, but I'm being bullied. And it's like, but what does that look like? You know, what are you actually hearing? What are you actually seeing? And for one of the children that I've had in my care, you know, she had lots of examples of actually being, you know, bullied over a longer period of time, you know, for things that she had no control over. And then she often experienced that through the bystander stuff, you know, that she had friends that were also bullied and picked on. Our experience that most of that was happening face-to-face, normally at school. I know that devices are getting given to younger and younger children, but for us, we kind of tried to keep that you know, as minimal as possible at that age, which I think helped to keep the bullying in one place rather than all sort of areas of their life. But for her, it meant, you know, that she was experiencing it, but she was seeing other people experience it as well. Next slide, please. So high school, it's like a total shift for lots of kids. They don't want to be othered. They don't want to be seen as different. The things that made them unique in primary school that make them different now, they'll pull away from and push away from themselves. So a lot of the bullying that, you know, the young people I've looked after experience, but also their friends are experiencing, is about being different. You see the teenagers sort of get swept up in stuff very quickly, and especially when we think about like social media, sharing stuff and, you know, commenting on things and maybe not directly bullying, but getting swept up and being involved because it's now a group activity. It's not just in the schoolyard. It's actually, you know, in their phones and on their devices, in their homes every day. Next slide, please. The support is, I think it has to be multifaceted. It can't just be any one kind of group tackling this. I think the schools do their best they can around the education side of stuff and around like debriefing and trying to kind of give them tools. But I think it's also important at home, like that we were working on general self-esteem all of the time. Because if you've got a young person or a child who feels, you know, like secure in themselves, then they're more easily going to manage and deal with that bullying situation when it comes up. I think also making sure you've got good, strong role models in the children's lives. So we are quite deliberate about the friends that I have that we kind of say, you know, these are like our go-to people. I always let the kids in my care make the decision of whether that person is for them or not, but they'll gravitate to the ones they want to. So make sure they're good, strong role models. And I think for me, the takeaway from everything for tonight will be keep talking, and keep talking. So that for me was about generally chatting. Like I wanted to know who her friends were, what stuff was happening at school day to day, like what sort of things she likes to do, what she doesn't like to do. But that meant that I got to know her friends better. So when she was having a rough day, I could actually talk about and name the friends that she was hanging out with, which meant that, you know, we had a better understanding of what was happening. It also meant that we talked about some of the situations that were happening, both to herself and to her friends. And I think one of the really good ones I loved was the friendship red flags and green flags. I don't know, I think this was something she was taught at school. And, you know, we still use those terms even now, quite a number of years later. I really liked it because for her, it was just simple. You know, what are the red flags? You know, when she talks about a friend, you know, teasing somebody else, I could say, oh, do you reckon that fits in the red flag or the green flag? I think maybe red flag because, and then it's a conversation, right? So the talking keeps continuing. I think also for her, it was really important that I encouraged her to talk to the school when things were at a point that she felt uncomfortable about it. So when either she was experiencing it, but also she had a friend that was, I would say, chronically bullied about her looks and her weight. And I really encouraged her to go back to the school staff that she felt safe talking to, not to dog on people, but to actually talk about how she felt and how she was feeling day to day with that stuff going on. It did get to a point where I made the decision also to talk to the school staff, and it can be really tricky as a parent to make that decision because you don't want to get involved with, you know, your kids' stuff and they tell you not to talk to anyone because they're worried about, you know, getting payback. But I think if it's at the point where it's impacting daily life, either for your child or for their friends, it might be time to bring that to the attention of the school staff. They are probably already aware, but if it's at the point that the home is noticing it as well, it's probably gotten a bit further out of control than just at school. And, you know, there may be conversations that need to happen either with kids or with adults about some of that stuff. Next slide, please. No, that's me done. So that's me finished. Thank you very much.
Great. Thanks, Jess. Some really great insights there. I like, you know, it was really clear that you were making a lot of links with your child's friends, making links between your child and safe school staff, and those links between yourself and the staff as well. That was really clear in your experience. So thank you for sharing that. I'll now hand over to Hayley. Thanks, Hayley.
Thanks, Nicole. And I'm going to start tonight where I always start when I'm meeting with a young person and their family, and that's, you know, considering their presentation and their psychosocial assessment. So when I'm initially meeting with families or with young people in a therapy setting, I'm interested in researching the concerns that all family members hold. In this conversation, I'm paying close attention to the language young people use to describe these concerns. I'm then interested in researching the context in which these concerns exist or arise. I'm always working to stay open-minded that bullying might be only one of the concerns that this young person or their family is up against. In researching the context of these concerns, I'm working to understand and bring forward information about the family environment. So things like parental resources, the sense of belonging that this young person has in the family, experiences of abuse, of violence, of trauma, and relevant, you know, family history in relation to mental health and physical health. Next slide, please. So I'm also wanting to understand the peer and social context, the school context, sorry. So I'm interested in the experiences that this young person has in these systems day to day, how they experience their own learning and how their parents experience the school systems and their own learning. I'm also checking in around mental state at this point. So I'm checking in with this young person about sleep, appetite. I'm looking at how they're dressed. I'm listening to how they're speaking. I'm checking in around self-harm and suicidal ideation, amongst other things. In this conversation, I'm not collecting this information for myself. I'm collecting this information for this therapeutic relationship because I want this family and this young person to experience my interest in their lives as a whole and all of the things that matter to them. I'm wanting to start to bring this information forward and start to put together the context in which these concerns exist. Next slide, please. So at this point, I'm wanting to start naming and externalising the problem and creating a separation between the child and the problem. And this is really important. This is because problems, in this case bullying, often have a way of shaping how a young person sees themselves and leaves them feeling like they as a person don't measure up. So when young people are responding to bullying that's occurred over time, they will usually have been exposed to descriptions of themselves that are untrue. And, you know, young people often convince this is because they have sort of some character flaw, some personality flaw. They can feel like they are worthless, like they're unlikable, or they're not as worthy of care as others. And if I don't provide some distance, it's difficult to research with this young person their own strengths, their own abilities, as distinct from the bullying's description of them. Next slide, please. So this approach supports young people to deconstruct the dominant narratives that contribute to bullying, identify and challenge some of the societal norms and expectations that perpetuate these behaviours, and helps them to take a position against the bullying rather than going along with the bullying's description of them or have them feel passive in response to bullying. So if we think about Olivia in our case study, Olivia's already started to develop ideas about herself and her body that the bullying's influenced. She may already be thinking, I'm not beautiful. If I was skinnier, people would like me more. If I looked different, they wouldn't bully me. All of these things are descriptions, or all of these are descriptions that the bullying has influenced rather than Olivia. Next slide, please. Once this separation has occurred, it allows us to research the effects of the bullying on the young person and also their family. That's really important. The effects are often broad and include effects on family and peer relationships, effects that the bullying has had on learning, on the relationships that this young person has with the things that they enjoy, and of course the relationship they have with themselves. I find researching what the bullying is getting in the way of, what it's taken away, what this family want to reclaim or take back, I think are questions that really help generate some enthusiasm in the conversations. Next slide, please. Careful research of the effects of the bullying helps everyone in the family and the school shape their responses accurately. So in Olivia's case, the bullying's increased her sense of isolation, has her wanting to stay away from schools, created a focus on her body, has her restricting what she's eating and thinking about dieting. So it's fair to say that the bullying has likely got in the way of Olivia having fun, feeling safe and comfortable at school, probably got in the way of trying new things and interrupted her learning and academic goals. Understanding in detail the effects of the bullying is really important, and it helps this young person and their family get clear on what's being taken away, and then it sets us up to create a plan on how we're going to respond to this. Next slide, please. So building agency and creating a plan with the young person and their family. So it's essential that the burden of change when we're talking about bullying doesn't sit with the child alone, and that the family and the school are involved in supporting this change. Agency, we often talk about agency, and I think it's helpful to think about agency as skills and knowledge in action. To develop this young person's sense of agency, I'm wanting to research with them and collect evidence for their ability to weaken, to reduce, or to limit the bullying or its effects. Next slide, please. So I like to research the values positions that young people hold and how they've stayed aligned to these values in the face of bullying. Pulling these forward and thinking about how young people are keeping hold of them in this difficult time, I think helps young people to experience themselves as active and contributes to that sense of agency that we want them to have. The plan I am referring to is a collection of skills and knowledge everyone in the family has developed on how to respond to bullying and its effects, and how everyone in the family is going to put these into action. So this includes the steps the family, the school, and this young person will take, and this is based on the conversations that we've had. Next slide, please. So, and I'll expand a little bit on the plan in our Q&A. This is a few points that I put together that didn't sit anywhere particularly nicely, but I thought were really important to mention. So I find it really helpful to have a transparent working relationship between the school, the family, and the therapist. If consent for this is withheld, I am really hesitant to pursue therapy in that setting. The communication with the school doesn't mean that we take steps this young person's not okay with, But it is important that the school, who holds duty of care for that young person, is provided with the information that they need to respond. And if that's not happening, then some strong advocacy is provided to the school to ensure that those steps have been taken. Over time, I've learned from many young people how important it is to develop my awareness of neurodivergent ways of experiencing the world. And I'm in no way suggesting that every young person that we meet in relation to bullying is neurodivergent, but I do hold in my mind a possibility that this might be part of the picture. And I'm particularly thinking about things like autism and ADHD. At times, young people who struggle socially can find the language around bullying helpful to describe the experience that they're having. And over time, this narrative can be firmed up by really good, strong attempts to support and advocate for this young person. If neurodivergence is part of, or I think it might be part of the picture, I'm having those conversations really openly with families, and then we're weighing up whether or not assessment is helpful. Next slide, please. So some of the things that I might be listening for are, is this young person using social scripts, and what happens when those don't work? Is this young person able to consider other possibilities and perspectives in relationships? Are they rule-bound? Do they experience a relationship injury if a perceived rule is broken? These are the sorts of things I'm listening for. Lastly, to wrap me up tonight, if racism or discrimination or prejudice is part of the bullying that is occurring, it's really important that we name these things specifically. I don't want to pit these experiences against one another because they're all really profound. But if we're not accurate, then it really limits our exploration of that with the young person and the steps that we're going to take. Thanks, Nicole.
Great, thanks, Hayley. Really interested in that, separating the child and the problem, and the different descriptions, and the description that bullying gives to children as opposed to an alternative description. That was fascinating. So thank you for that and the rest of your presentation. And now I'll hand over to Jessica. Thanks, Jessica.
Thanks so much, Nicole. I too have found it really interesting to listen to Jess and to Hayley as well, and just to hear the different perspectives that we take, I guess, in approaching bullying. So I thought I might start with just running through, I guess, some of the learning outcomes. And I think Hayley left things in a really good spot for me to kind of shift into why bullying occurs. I find that for so many of the students that I see in the school setting, they don't actually know why bullying is occurring. And I think providing that information can be really enlightening. It can be reassuring. It can reduce their own sense of self, blame, shame, embarrassment. And I know Hayley started to talk a little bit about that as well, I think, in terms of thinking about externalizing the problem too. So usually when I'm working with somebody that it has experienced some bullying, we'll work together to try and understand, maybe why some of this is happening, and maybe, why this person particularly might be engaging in that bullying behaviour towards them or towards others as well. So some of the things that I might start to think about are, possibly does the bully has experienced some sort of trauma? Have they got attachment challenges? Perhaps if they have experienced some sort of trauma, maybe they're more hyper aroused, they're more easily triggered into reacting. Possibly they have sort of an inhibited sense of emotionality because of the trauma. Maybe they've been in really awful social situations themselves in the past, and that's led them to be in the position that they're in now. Do they have a lack of positive role models at home? Have they got somebody that's, modelling positive engagement at school or at previous schools? Have they watched bullying happen? And have they thought, that's a good thing or that's a bad thing? Are they witnessing people engage in appropriate social behaviour towards one another? Some of the other things are jealousy. Is this person particularly jealous of others at school? Are they jealous of their intelligence? Are they jealous of their social abilities? Do they just really want to fit in? And sometimes, they think they're being really funny and misinterpret, I guess, people's reaction. Is there contagion effects? I think we see that an awful lot now in social media. And I think adolescents are so much more open to influence, particularly online. So, are they copying? And I think that kind of inhibition, particularly when you're in an online setting, if I just type this, it almost feels like there's not as much impact as there is face-to-face. Are they trying to, get the upper hand? Are they trying to be in power? Are they trying to get a reaction out of this person? If I push this button, what's going to happen? If I push this button, how will they respond? Has the person who's engaging in the bullying behaviour, like Hayley mentioned, have they got neurodivergence? Have they got some sort of a DSM diagnosis? Are they delayed in their learning and their capacity, or is it that possibly they have, a diagnosis, which means that they might struggle a little bit more with their social awareness, they might have trouble reading social cues, and has that led to them being in a situation where perhaps they're engaging in inappropriate behaviour towards others, but maybe even not being that aware that it's happening, and it's having a significant impact on the other person. And then some of the other things that I like to think about are just broadly, what are some of the other cultural influences? So is there social media? There's social media kind of models that are modelling inappropriate behaviour, whether that be bullying behaviour or whether it be, as sort of Hayley alluded to before, that racism, that sort of thing. Is it that they're seeing people in the media that they're copying? Is it that there is a culture of turning a blind eye, possibly at school? Like, is it that the expectations are really unclear? It's not been made really concrete that actually bullying is really unacceptable, and, that it won't be tolerated in any way. Next slide, please. So then if we think a little bit more about children or students' experience of bullying and some of the impacts, I start to have a think about, I guess, how I approach my engagement with students or clients when they do disclose that there's something going on. And I think what I've found is that actually sometimes students reveal things and they might downplay it because they want to avoid confrontation. Sometimes they don't even know that actually what they're reporting is quite significant bullying that's happening to them, and they're just completely unaware. So I just think our role as practitioners is actually to support and to help children to understand the difference between that appropriate behaviour that happens socially and inappropriate behaviour or bullying behaviour, and to call it out. So in terms of my approach with students and even with families, I try really hard to approach with a sense of curiosity. I try really hard not to lead a child, not to be leading them down the direction of did this happen, or did you engage this way, or did you, I guess, trigger it. I think just try not ask really open-ended questions, reduce that leading. Again, like Hayley said, just echoing a child's language. So they're using certain words, echoing that because that has meaning for them. Trying to establish, I guess, a bit of a timeline. How long has this been going on for? What sort of intensity have we got? Is it happening at school? Is it happening online? Is it happening outside of school? Are they being targeted when they're, at the train station about to get on their train? Is it that they feel frightened to pick up their phone because there'll be something on there? So trying to get a really broad understanding of when it's happening and where. I think the other thing that's really important is that we need to be led by the child, and we need to be focusing on building trust with them, because so often I find that this is a really hard topic to talk about, and I think it can take time for them to process what's going on, to be able to come out with it, because again, there is that sense of shame, guilt, embarrassment that something's happened. So it can take time to get all of the information, and we need to be really just careful and cautious and go along and follow their lead. I think one of the biggest things is there's always concern that they're going to be named the snitch, or they're going to get in trouble, or or, by them communicating with us, it's going to get worse. So I think just acknowledging that, acknowledging that it's really hard to talk with me. And I know, a lot of people are concerned that by saying something, you're going to be labelled the snitch. But, please let me reassure you that we're here to help, and, we'll do everything in our power, obviously, to make sure that that's not the case. As much as we don't want to say, look, bullying's normal, I think there is some value in us saying, look, 1 in 5 people experience bullying. And that's not to make out as though it's okay, but it's simply to say, look, this is something that we're all battling with, and, we can help you get through it. And I think you'll find you probably turn to somebody sitting at a desk next to you, and at some point in their life, they've probably experienced an uncomfortable or a bullying situation themselves. And sometimes that can be really reassuring. Like, it's not just me. This is not necessarily all about me, and, how awful or hopeless or worthless I am. The other things that I might look to explore is, who knows that this is happening? Does a friend know? Do the school know? Do your parents know? And if there's really serious concerns around risk of harm, who needs to know? It's really important for us to understand, particularly if there's illegal activity going on, particularly if there's concerns that are reportable. We need to understand, the level of bullying and the level of activity that is going on. And I think just considering both minor and major impacts, I think Hayley was mentioning before, it was Jess mentioning before that some of the things that can actually lead to bullying are things like non-attendance and, they're looking different, appearing different, where their family comes from. But I also think that we can flip that and realise that actually those can be impacts of bullying too. So, bullying can result in a lot of school refusal. It can result in changes in somebody's appearance. They might dramatically lose weight. They might put on weight. They might talk about their family more or less. So, consider impacts in a really broad way. Next slide, please. So that sort of self-blame is a really, really big thing for these kids. And I think one of the really important things for us as practitioners is to try and help reduce that by also increasing their connectedness and making them feel like bullying is not all them. Like, that's not the whole thing that's taking up their life. I often sort of say, look, we've got to draw upon the things that they're really good at, draw out their strengths, draw out some positive things that are going on in their life, draw on their past experiences, so that if we look up in the sky, it's not dull, or it's not just bullying is the only star that's shining, that's the focus in their life. There should be other things around them that we're able to light up and, make them even brighter than anything else that's going on in their life. So I think, as I said, acknowledging why bullying is occurring is really empowering. That can help with self-blame, but also just drawing upon past experience and their strengths. So, have they recovered from bullying before? Do they have other friends? Have they, been able to make other connections in the past? Are they good at certain things? Are there things in their life that they think, gee, yeah, that's a real strength for me? I think, for everybody, we all need a sense of accomplishment and achievement to feel good about ourselves. So I think, trying to find some things that we can light up for these students or clients is really, really important. And in the case of Olivia, if I was working with her, reviewing and reminding her that she's made friends in the past, and even though she's come to a new school and things have been challenging for her, she's got good friends at Nippers. She had friends at her previous school. She's got a close relationship with her sister. Is there anybody else that potentially she can connect with through her sister that might help her to build on that friendship group? Is there anybody else that's outside of this group that's also feeling targeted that she can align herself with? That kind of, again, going back to that normalizing, is there anybody that she can kind of be aligned with? The other thing is, trying to find activities for her where she feels comfortable and confident and out of, the way of bullying situations. Are there groups at school at lunchtime where she can meet other children with aligned interests? Same sort of thing, like their values, and I know Hayley touched on that as well. And that she can find models where, appropriate friendships are modelled. And then the other thing is just harnessing her strengths and building on her self-worth. So throwing herself into things that she's really good at and helping her to build that sense of accomplishment and achievement. Next slide, please. And just in thinking about building a support team when a student or a client is experiencing bullying, I think the biggest thing for me is helping a child to identify people that they feel like they can be vulnerable with. I think there's, I think we can all say, who do you feel can support you? Who can you go to? Mum, dad, brother, sister, all of that sort of thing. But I think it's really important to find somebody that you feel like you can be vulnerable with, because bullying does make you feel really, really vulnerable. And I think, we often make an assumption that we know who might be in the child support team, but the supports are often not who we expect. Sometimes it's an auntie, sometimes it's a neighbour, sometimes it's the year 7 coordinator that they had 3 years ago that they feel comfortable with and they feel like they can be vulnerable. So I guess don't make an assumption that you would know who they feel comfortable going to, because often these kids don't feel comfortable going to their parents, or they don't feel comfortable going to their year advisor or their housemaster or whoever it is in whatever school they're at. With Olivia, I guess, again, has she got anybody at Nippers? Has she got past school friends that she feels she can go to? Her sister and her parents, are they, supports for her? Does she feel comfortable speaking with them? If she's struggling to identify, suggest some examples, and that might be, other family members, external friends, therapist, school counsellor, neighbour, cousin. There might be a cousin who's experienced bullying and, they've managed to come through it and they've got some ways of coping and, they can connect on that. The other thing that I tend to do when I'm working with a young person who's experienced bullying is just to explore what a positive relationship actually looks like. What does Olivia want out of a friendship? I guess what would the ideal friendship look like? But also helping her to reflect a little bit on what she considers positive qualities that she has to offer in a friendship too. So helping her to sort of draw out what she'd like those future friendships to look like. And then the last thing is really just exploring when concerns need to be escalated to adults, because sometimes that's a really hard conversation to have. But there are times where, the situation does need to be escalated because it's resulting in significant impacts for this young person, or they're at risk of harm. And at that point, it's really important that we do have that conversation around how we can help facilitate bringing in that person's support network. That's me. Thank you, Nicole.
Thanks, Jessica, for that. I always really liked your star analogy and using that with kids. I imagine that's quite effective, kind of mapping out their night sky almost. So that brings us to the Q&A session. We've had a few questions coming through, which is excellent. And we certainly had quite a number of questions coming through at the registration stage as well. So we've received quite a few. And unfortunately, we won't be able to get to all of them, but we'll endeavour to answer as many as we can in the time that we have left. And I just wanted to note as well, we had some questions in the registration stage about children who engage in bullying behaviour and supporting them. So I just wanted to flag that we've got some resources in the Emerging Minds resource library on that specific topic. So if you look at practice strategies for childhood bullying, it's an online course. There's a whole module in there dedicated to supporting the mental health of children who engage in bullying behaviour. And we've got a podcast as well, which is a conversation between myself and Jessica, actually. So jump on and check those out as well, because, again, that's, obviously a really important topic to be talking about too. So I wanted to open up the Q&A first. There were a lot of, obviously all of you alluded to the inclusion of parents and carers in the problem, and that was a question that came up a lot in registration, but we've also had a few coming through the chat as well, around when would you engage a parent in this process, and what are some strategies that you might use to engage? Might start with you, Jess, if that's okay.
I think for me, coming from the lived experience side of things, I think if it's impacting daily life of either my child or their friends, then I would probably want to start having those conversations with the school. I think also like the risk and the harm and anything physical, anything illegal, obviously would be raised much earlier. But I think for me, it's more about guiding the child to access that support as well. I think, what was the second part? The strategies?
Yeah. So what would you suggest, I suppose, for starting that conversation with parents about bullying?
I think pre-warning them that you want to have a conversation about, say, bullying. I wouldn't want somebody to just call me up and be like, hey, because I want to kind of prepare what I'm thinking about that. I think also face-to-face is better if you can, because I think over the phone, it's just really hard to misinterpret and, to not get the full message. If you can do it, if it's a casual concern, it's not something that needs to be formalised. Can you catch them at the school gate? Can you, get them to come in to sign a form they have to sign? Can you then have that side conversation? But it might mean you have to make some time, and that's okay too. And it's just about wanting to support the child. I think that's the most important thing, whether they're the bully or have bully behaviour or are being bullied. I think, it's about how do we help the kids be as healthy as they need to be to do the thing they need to do.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Jess. Jessica, did you want to?
Yeah. So I guess, I totally agree with what Jess has said. I think when it's starting to impact their daily life, I think particularly when it's starting to impact a child's mental health or there's significant risk of harm, I think it's really important to bring parents in. Often parents don't know what's happening, and I think creating a safe space at home by sensitively helping to bring that up. I agree with Jess. I think it's really important to try and do that in person if you can, because sometimes it's a shock as a parent, hearing that your child is the target of some, inappropriate behaviour is a really hard thing to hear. So I think important to make the space and be able to deliver that news in person. I think if the child is older that you're working with, sometimes they are likely to feel, again, that sense of shame, embarrassment. Perhaps they're reluctant to have the parents involved because they think maybe it'll make it worse. Maybe the parents will be really overprotective, won't let them go anywhere, that sort of thing. So I find sometimes it's really helpful to have a conversation with the young person about how to break the news to the parents and involve them in that conversation. Tell them that it's really important that we bring mum and dad along and let them know what's going on. But, how do they think it's going to be delivered best? What sorts of pieces of information are really helpful for them to know? I think in terms of actually working with parents, again, like Jess said, I think one of the biggest impacts that we can have as practitioners in working with parents who have children who've experienced bullying is helping them to be able to sit with emotions and open the dialogue. I think helping them to find ways of being sensitive, empathic, open with their child so that their child or young person feels comfortable coming to them down the track, so that line of communication is open for them. They, capable of having a safe and secure attachment relationship with their child, so that in the future, if anything wants to come up, they're going to be one person that they're going to reach out to. So, I guess resisting jumping into problem solving, but helping them to be able to sit with emotions and be open to be their go-to person.
Yeah, great. Thanks. Thanks, Jessica. And Hayley, what are your thoughts on engaging parents?
Thanks, Nicole. I'm largely going to echo Jess and Jessica, and that is, I think the earlier that we can bring parents on board, the better. I mean, bullying by its very nature is ongoing, and so this is possibly one of a number of conversations that we're going to have with families. And, as Jess and Jessica said, that initial conversation can be really tough, but what is tougher is bringing parents in down the track when they have been sort of excluded from being able to support their young person. That, that does not set up a particularly transparent, trusting relationship between the parent and the school. So the earlier the better. That also gives us an opportunity. I think, Jessica, you spoke a little bit about this too, around helping that parent shape their responses. When that child gets home, some parents really need some help around, what am I going to say when they get home? How am I going to raise this? These conversations can be really unfamiliar for parents and children. So, that initial conversation also gives that parent an opportunity to think about, what am I going to say when they get home? How am I going to do this? Rather than them being sort of thrown in the deep end and not having any support around that. So earlier is always better. I mean, of course, you're going to apply some professional judgment, and if bringing a parent in is going to sort of increase risk or harm to that young person in a way that's unacceptable, of course, you rethink that. But, we can often think that, I think it's reasonable to say that parents are often a young person's greatest resource. And so to kind of exclude them from being able to support their young person in responding to this, it's a bit of a waste of that resource.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Hayley. So common theme is not ambushing parents in the conversation, I noticed. I wanted to follow up that question, actually. Richard in the Q&A has asked, what happens when, or what should you do if the family are not particularly supportive, or potentially there's things going on at home that might be part of the problem? I might just open that up for anyone to jump in to share what they would do in that sort of scenario.
Do you like me to jump in, Nicole? Look, I think that's always a possibility when we take this step, and not making assumptions as to why that response is the case, I think is really helpful. I think we need to think about this as an initial conversation, and it might be that this family is going to need more than one conversation to help them make sense of this. It might be that this family just can't think about anything else at the moment. But I would really see that as an opportunity to kind of stick in there and stay in there. That young person is going to need a fair bit of advocacy, given that that's the response that family has provided. So I think we think about it as an initial conversation, and then we keep going. We keep sticking at it. If that family are not coming to the table, then we might be starting to think about who else can we pull in for this young person, who else in this school setting, who else in this community, who else in their sports clubs, who else can we get around this young person in the absence of their family having enough resources to do this.
Right, yeah. Did anyone have anything to add to that?
No, I think I would, just add, I absolutely agree with Hayley. I think, it's the starting conversation that you're having, and sometimes you do actually have to just take these families on a journey. It doesn't happen overnight. And I think, as you mentioned, there may be other things that are going on at home, and perhaps now is not the right time, but perhaps in a couple of months it will be. Perhaps when they see the impacts that it's having on their child, maybe things will change. But I think that doesn't change the fact that we will continue to work really hard with that young person, whether or not their parents are on board. I think we still continue focusing on building their resilience, helping them to find coping strategies, helping them, to be able to, build on their mental health.
Yeah, great. And I think each of you sort of mentioned this when you were doing your presentations, is sort of that could think outside the box in terms of those support systems and support people or role models, as you mentioned, Jess, to build that sort of team around the child as well, particularly when there might be some issues at home as well. So thank you for that. I wanted to actually ask you a question, Jess. This one's from Andy, and she was asking about the green and red flags, which I love too. I think that's great sort of language to open up a conversation. And what sort of, I guess, kid-friendly language are you using in that scenario? How do you kind of, suppose, use that?
I'm happy to give an example. So we talk fairly regularly about pretty much everything, but I try not to bombard her the minute she walks in the door. I normally give her space and her time, and then she'll often mention something that's happened at school or like a friendship issue that's going on, and she'll tell me about a friend that maybe is ignoring everybody else, or she'll talk about something that happened in class and somebody got into trouble. And so I just sort of get curious. I'm a big fan of curious questions. And I say, I've heard you talk about that friend a little bit. Are you close? And then she'll sort of talk about that. And I say, so you mentioned, that they're ignoring everybody. Do you reckon that fits in the red flag stuff or the green flag stuff for you? Like, what kind of angle do you think it's coming from? And then I've kind of guided that it's normally red. And then I go, can you tell me a bit more about that? Is that something they're normally doing? And then she'll sort of say, no, it's a bit off. And I say, I wonder what's going on. Like, has something happened for them at home maybe? Or, did you see them have like a blow up with one of the friends? And, then she'll sort of start to open that conversation up a bit more. And if I can get to that point, we try and then suggest things that she might do to support that friend. So rather than to then, just give the same back, which then obviously escalates that behaviour into bullying, try and get her to go, what would you do as a green flag for her? How would you come at it so that you kind of trying to undo that red flag thing that's happening? And then she comes up with the strategies and the things she might do or say, whatever she feels comfortable doing in that moment. Hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah, so maintaining that curiosity and I was supporting her to come up with some of those strategies.
Yeah, it's really important that it feels comfortable doing it. If I suggest it, if you've ever met any teenager ever, it'll never happen. But if I kind of guide some of those options for her and it's her idea, of course, then she's much more, she's got the buy-in to want to actually do it then.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Jess. Thanks. I wanted to ask Hayley, this was something that was interesting. So it came up a little bit in the pre-registration questions, but Panella popped a question in the Q&A box as well around when children disengage from school when there's been bullying, and what you might be able to do to support re-engagement.
This is such a tricky thing for families, and disengagement and school refusal can happen really quickly, and I think people often underestimate how fast it can happen. It can be, a day off, and then we can be at school refusal. So this problem can get really serious really quickly, and families can often be caught quite off guard. Look, I think when we're at the point where there's disengagement, I think it's really important to stop at that point and bring that family and that young person in to meet with the school. I think at that point, we really need to come together, and we need to kind of support that young person and the family, and hopefully the school also will participate in putting together a plan that everyone's really comfortable with to support this young person to re-engage. As I talked a little bit about earlier, I would really want that young person's voice to be at the centre of that plan, and I would want that plan to be really detailed. down to sort of like, where is this young person going to sit when they arrive on Monday? Who are they going to be sitting next to? Have they got peers and allies around them? Do they need kind of a pit stop between arriving at school and actually getting into the classroom? How and what's going to be communicated to teachers? You know, can that young person co-author that communication to teachers? What is the school going to do to actually, you know, interrupt this bullying and make it safe for this young person to come back? I think this plan has to be really detailed, and everybody has to be really confident in this plan, because essentially what we're going to do is ask this family to hold really firm lines around getting their kid to school. And if, you know, this young person and this mum and dad don't feel like, you know, if I hold this line and I get them there, that they're going to be safe and okay, they're just not going to be able to do it in the morning when it gets really tough. So I think, you know, at the point of disengagement, really stopping and slowing down, putting together a really detailed plan that everybody's really comfortable with, documenting that plan, working out how we're going to review that plan, and then stepping into that plan. I think I'm probably making that sound a whole lot more simplified, but essentially that's, you know, the process that we want to follow.
Yeah, and is that those are the sorts of things that you would include in that plan that you were talking about in your presentation?
Absolutely. I'd want to have some conversations with that young person around what this bullying has interrupted, what it's taken away from them at school, how we're going to take some of that back, how we're going to reestablish that for them. Yeah, absolutely. And that would be the same for the family too. The devil's really in the detail. So down to, you know, if we kind of, you know, work out who are going to be the key supports around this young person, how are they going to get to them? What language are they going to use to ask for help? You know, and it might be that we need rehearsal and we need some practice of this and we need to walk these plans through. That won't be necessary for everybody, but I think being really detailed. So when we get to Monday morning, we ask those parents to hold really firm lines, that they know that their young person, that plan's really robust and they can lean into that.
Great, thanks. Did anyone have anything to add to that?
No, I think Hayley's mentioned some really, really good points. I'm just reflecting on sort of what we do at school, and I guess that's exactly the case. The return to school plan is so important. I think just having a key support person that they can go to, you know, often I'm somebody who's returned from, you know, having a period of school refusal. I'll have really regular check-ins with them first thing in the morning so that there's a touch point. I know that they're coming straight to see me. And then it's like, as Hayley indicated, that transition, it's like a pit stop. This is the transition into my office and then from my office into school. So having that kind of regular check-in, I find really helps. If we can get to that point, it's like we can get to the next step as well.
The only other thing I would add to that would be, both as a youth worker but as a parent, if you're at the point of school refusal for something, just checking in that there's not other stuff going on as well, because, you know, often the thing that's really obvious is actually hiding some other stuff. And so obviously Jessica and Hayley are both professionals. I'm sort of more coming at it from like the parent angle. Like I would want to make sure there's not more going on that I'm aware of as well.
Yeah, great. Yeah, thanks, Jess. That's important. Jessica, I wanted to throw a question to you. And someone asked in the chat about the strategies around increasing self-worth and reducing that self-blame, and if there's anything else you can sort of add to how you might sort of do that, I suppose.
Again, I think, you know, starting from a point of trying to understand why bullying is happening, as I said, is really, really important, because I think, you know, often it's very easy for us to jump onto blaming it. It's all our fault. But if we can kind of take a bit of perspective and understand that this is not a me thing necessarily, but potentially it's actually more related to what's going on in the life of that bully, I think that can be really helpful. As I said, again, just trying to build up on, you know, some of the things that are strengths for them and build up on some of their interests is really important, particularly if you've got a young person that's low in mood or flat in affect. You know, that behavioural activation is really important, you know, finding things that they can get out and do so that they have a sense of achievement and accomplishment. so that we break that kind of cycle of avoidance and cycle of depression. I think some of the other things that can be helpful just in building self-worth is just doing some work around values. And I know Hayley mentioned this too. What do they value? I think is a really important question to ask, and really exploring that, because I think we can get really caught up in taking on the views of the bully, that sometimes we lose sight of actually what's important to us in our lives. So often I'll do quite a lot of work with young people around their values, what's important, and it might be family, it might be, a sense of accomplishment, or it might be achievement, it might be success, it might be, there's a whole range of things that they could really value, but let's not lose sight of those things. I think sometimes this bullying can step in and kind of take over everything. But I think, bringing us back to our values is really important. The other thing is, if you've got a really strong value around, forgiveness and fairness and justice and all that sort of thing, are your actions aligned with your values? And are your responses aligned with your values? So, can we forgive? Can we find a way to get past what's been going on? That sort of thing. So I think that can really help build up a person's self-worth and confidence and reduce some of that blame too.
Yeah, great. Yeah, thanks, Jessica. And I wanted to open up one final question to the panel around a question we got a lot in pre-registration was around moving schools and when that might be warranted and whether it reinforces avoidance if it happens. So I thought that was a really interesting question. And so I wanted to make sure we covered off on that tonight. I'll open that up to whoever wants to jump in.
I'll jump in first. I think it's a really interesting question and a really, really valid question. I think it gets asked an awful lot, I think, by a lot of parents as well. I would say every case is different. So we have to take it on a case-by-case basis. Perhaps a school is not the right fit for a child and would never have been. And that might be because it doesn't suit their interests, it doesn't suit their learning style. So, in that circumstance, perhaps changing schools is appropriate. But, if the school has plenty on offer to the child and perhaps the bullying is related to some underlying social challenges that the child might have, then perhaps engaging in, finding a new school may reinforce that kind of avoidance or the anxiety, because perhaps they might actually experience the same thing in another school setting, and then, we will be in the same situation again. So in that circumstance, perhaps, it's more important for us to be focusing on their coping style and, helping them to find an assertive communication style, helping them to be more socially aware, helping them to be able to pick up on social cues, that sort of thing, helping to build their resilience. So I think it's not a simple question. I think it's one of those things where, it is really case by case. But I think, obviously we don't want students moving from school to school, but if they're really unhappy and the school is not able to meet their needs, then I think, obviously we choose happiness.
Yeah, I'd really echo that, Jessica, too. I was reflecting on this question. I thought it was an excellent question, actually. And often when I'm talking with families, I'll bring up ideas or hopes, I should say, to give their young person, a clean slate, a fresh start. These are often sort of hopes that families have when we're talking about changing schools. And I think it's really important that we get really clear on what we're actually talking about, because what we're actually talking about is a young person making a whole new set of peer relationships, a whole new set of teacher relationships, learning a whole new school system, things like new computer systems, learning a whole new school culture. So, that is a really big ask for any young person, particularly a young person who's coming into a school setting off of the back of experiences of bullying. So I think it's really important that if we're leaning into these sort of fresh start, clean slate ideas, that we get really clear on what that actually means. I think, as you said, Jessica, there's absolutely times when a move is warranted. But I would, as you said, really stress that we stick in as long as we can and really exhaust the possibilities to create some change in the school that they're in, of course, within reason. Because that move, when we really think about everything that move is going to mean for that young person, it's a huge amount of pressure. And we wouldn't want to ask that of a young person unless it was absolutely necessary, because if something goes wrong, as you said, Jessica, if it goes wrong again at the next school, then we've really established a pattern that says to this young person, you're the problem. And that's a really risky space to be in. So, absolutely there's times when it's warranted, and families have given everything to those conversations with the school and, with no change. But it's something that needs to be really carefully weighed up.
I think I would say it really depends on where it's coming from and how it's going to be supported. Our situation is obviously quite unique. But there was some really deliberate conversations going from primary school to high school that my child requested that we didn't go to a local high school. And the reason for that was because everybody knew her history and she wanted a fresh start. She didn't want anyone to know she was in care, and she wanted to keep that confidential. And we had lots of conversations in the lead up as to what sort of school would work for her, and, making sure it's got the academics and the, sport and whatever else. But we really had some honest conversations of how hard that's going to be to be able to maintain that information. And I guess it depends on, why somebody's being bullied. They may want to go into the next school and start that fresh start, but sometimes, young people are not always good at knowing what information to share and what not to. So we really had some very guided conversations, and also included our psychologist with that as well, about how she could maintain that and still feel authentic and real and make those friendships. So I think it really is time and place, and it's got to be supported.
Yeah, great. Thanks, everybody. So really that's sort of case by case, isn't it? As you've all alluded to. That's the end of our Q&A session. I wanted to ask each of you just to give a little, I suppose, summary or your take-home message for tonight. We've covered a lot of ground. So, Jess, would you like to share your take-home message for tonight?
Get curious with your questions and talk, whether you are a parent, whether you are a professional, whether you're supporting a parent, really encouraging genuine relationship with parent and child, and those curious questions. How do you do that without sounding like you're interrogating them, but genuine interest? Talk, and curious questions.
Thanks, Jess. And Hayley?
Thanks, Nicole. And, I think involving family, as much as possible. Of course, there's going to be struggles around that at times, but really using that resource to support young people. I think agency, if I could leave people with something, it would be, really make sure that young people are leaving those conversations with you with a sense of agency. And that they're developing their skills and knowledge in those conversations, and that you're getting really clear on what it is that they're bringing forward and what it is that they're taking out of those conversations. I also just was reflecting on Jessica's presentation, and I really enjoyed, the way that you were reflecting back to young people why bullying occurs. And I think it's a step that often is missed. I think we make lots of assumptions that young people just get it and they just know why it happens. And I think that's something that's really important, and I think a step that can often be missed. So that was something I really enjoyed. Thank you.
Thanks, Hayley. And Jessica, your final thoughts on tonight?
Yeah, look, I probably would say just remember as practitioners, we play a really, really big role in helping young people to differentiate between appropriate and inappropriate behaviour. So I think, don't make the assumption that young people know that bullying is occurring. I think it's really important for us to be sort of on the lookout and to be the ones as adults, I think, to be drawing that out. And again, as Hayley mentioned, I think, the understanding why bullying occurs does often get missed, and I think it's something that is really misunderstood by a lot of young people. So I think it's a really, really important thing to try and cover as much as you possibly can when working with a young person.
Great, thank you. Thanks to all three of you for your insights tonight. It's been really great. And thank you to our audience for their participation as well. We've had a lot of great questions come through. I'm just sorry we couldn't get to all of them tonight. But I will ask you if to complete the exit survey and provide some feedback on tonight, which helps us to improve these webinars and make sure you're getting what you need out of them. And you can click the banner above, scan that QR code, or go to that SurveyMonkey address provided at the end of the webinar. There will be a recording of the webinar as well, so you'll receive some follow-up communication from MHPN with the recording, and you'll also get a statement of attendance as well within 4 weeks, so look out for that. And just a reminder of our next webinars coming up. So we've got that one on June the 6th, Decolonising Mental Health when working with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children and families. And then on Wednesday the 28th, we've got Supporting the Mental Health of Bereaved Parents After Miscarriage, Stillbirth and Neonatal Death. And then in August, the latest innovations to embed and sustain trauma-informed care. So keep an eye out for those. And so just a reminder of MHPN supporting 350 networks across the country where mental health practitioners either meet in person or online to discuss those issues of local importance. So you can jump on the MHPN website to join, or you can even register your interest in starting a network in your area. Next slide, please. And this webinar is co-produced between MHPN and Emerging Minds for the Emerging Minds National Workforce Centre for Child Mental Health. And we're funded by the Australian Department of Health for the National Support for Children and Mental Health program. So that's all from us tonight. So thank you so much for joining us. Thanks again to our panellists, and good night.